Welcome back to the Brother Show. I'm your host, K Mo, where we have conversation around Mental Health Awareness Month, and we'll talk a little bit about that and what that looks like with relationships,
Music
how men are dealing with
licensing
that, and
reimagined.
depression. And 1 second. Welcome back to the Brother Show. I'm your host, K Mo. We're having a really good conversation today. It is October, and where we
Artlist.io.
celebrate and talk about Mental Health Awareness Month, a lot about depression. And so October 15th, that's when it is, but also it's a lot more going on, Domestic Violence Month. So we're talking a little bit about what that looks like from a male's point of view and how men have conversations around that. And so I really have tried to figure out what's some good content to kind of like talk about. And I had the
Artlist.io.
opportunity to kind of really look back at some of the things I've done in the past, closer to the COVID time. And because of that, I really wanted to like get back into that and what that looked like for a lot of men, because I've heard a lot of men have those conversations, and you know, we struggle with a lot of different things. But I just wanted to kind of like, uh, for those that know, I started a conversation group with men. It's called the Iron Circle. We've had conversations around fatherhood. We have conversation around mental health. We've had conversations around having conversation within your relationships and how difficult that can be without sounding like you are against the world or you're coming off aggressive or masculine. And so those have been very helpful. This recent one, we talked about faith and what faith looks like in today's community and in our community and our relationships. So huge. And so thanks to the guys even coming on, man, and being vulnerable. I've kind of tried to do huge shout outs with that, but those are personal conversations, and we have some expertise within those different areas who come on and tell their stories and how they've gotten over things, and that kind of segues into what this month is really all about. And depression is real for a lot of men, and not feeling like you can have conversations in certain areas. Those are things that I always hear in those talks, even at work. um, but how men get back to the place. So I wanted to talk about the recovery time. Like, what does that look like? What does the other side look like? Especially when you're going through it. And we've had a lot of people, a lot of guys on those talks, and I know I have a good group of women on here. So huge shout out to you all who are subscribers.
Music
Please
licensing
continue to
reimagined.
subscribe. And anytime I have those talks, please send that information to either your fathers, your brothers, your other friends. But I wanted to highlight the silence of men, fatherhood, and hidden depression. Um, just to kind of give you some statistics, 1 in 4 children in the U.S. grew up with a biological step or adoptive father at home. A minor, fact linked to emotional and behavior challenges within youth, and those are things that do have a direct effect, even if you think it does or not. These are statistics, right? So over 66 million men in the U.S. experience depression each year. Yet men at 3 to 4 times more likely to die over suicide than women. 3 to 4. Often due to untreated or hidden symptoms. And I say hidden because these are things, why we try to bring
Artlist.io.
awareness to this stuff, because it's hidden, because men are taught to not say anything. And we've had a culture now where we're kind of like trying to push that. One of the things I always say is that women have never really heard men talk before. You never really heard the truth, and you've been lied to, and it's unfortunate, but a lot of
Music
times
licensing
it is
reimagined.
true. I have a conversation with um, a past guest, and I wanted to kind of bring some light into some stuff. So where we are right now within the podcast, I've kind of explained where I was in relationship, primarily in college, and especially dealing with it at a young age, and how I was able to get over it, and a lot of the immature things that I didn't know about myself or even knew about being a man at that time. I did talk a little bit about like, being a good person, but also maybe not being the best version of a man at that time, and what I had to go through. And so we kind of just having a conversation right now. So I wanted to go back to that. It's going to be a part one to this series of silent battles from between men, fatherhood, and hidden depression. Here we go. And so that's kind of where I was. I'll talk about how I got over it. But that took me, I'm not gonna lie to anybody. I'll sit up here and say, like, it took me 10 years to fully get over that. 10 years. Because that was my college. It took me 10 years. You want to talk about maybe a situation that you had?
Yeah, sure, man. I can appreciate so much about, that piece of your story. And I will say, just in terms of, listeners, men who can identify with not really being prepared as a young man, not being prepared for what, for a breakup and what that means. There's so much that as young men we feel like we control.
Right.
And you realize early on when you start dealing with the opposite, the opposite sex, that you don't really control much of anything. They are their own person, and they have their own needs. And so in a relationship, you grow together and you help to support each other. But when that's cut off, how you carry on and understand what happened, learn from what happened is, it's a learning process. So, the little high school, middle school, early college breakups are important. They are an important part of our kind of evolution, as young men, because it helps us to understand that, life goes on and it continues. I will say that for me, so I was married for 10 years and knew my former wife for 14. So for 4 years before we were actually married, and so going through the process of.
So in this series, the first thing is kind of like breaking the silence with this silent battle, right? And as I mentioned before, too many men are silent, especially when in family or relationships, and they struggle to make. They always kind of struggle, makes them feel powerless, and then depression in those men often are hidden behind anger, withdrawal, or just overworking, like working all the time and not really facing the fact and really diving into those things. But silence only deepens the wound even more, right? And so this is us really kind of like taking that first step and breaking the silence and not being absent, right? And so we've always been told in our generation, hearing our fathers weren't there. Many of them, face addictions, military trauma, depression from, no language for help, right? No anything in support, and breaking the cycle by not acknowledging those things is the first thing that we're doing, because in this particular talk, we both acknowledged that we didn't have our fathers around for whatever reason. And even though both of us have both college graduates, both were able to, get into the job market and kind of be successful and, do the things that we wanted to do. In his case, he'll talk a little bit about that. But this is the first step, is like really talking about the past, where we are, and kind of like how to recover from those things if we're definitely trying to have a conversation and post and have a conversation about that. So.
Separating and then divorcing, understanding kind of what that meant, not just for the marriage, but also for my children, was something that took me a while to get through as well. And I will say, for me, it was more, it ended up being less about the marriage itself than the breakup of marriage, because honestly, at a certain point, and to be a good dad and to be present for my kids. So I did not grow up with a father around, and did grow up with the sort of perspective that no matter what, I want to, wake up in the same house with my children, and I want to see them as they grow up, and see them as they learn, and be a part, be a part of that process, be a teacher. And so the breakup of the marriage meant that vision had to evolve. That vision had to change. And how I defined being a good dad, when I thought about being a good dad was, had to evolve because my life circumstance changed. So it took me a while to really get through and redefining what that meant, and still being an active father, and still being very much involved in their lives, and making sure that they knew that I loved them and were proud of them, and the time that I could with them, but not in the way that I would have thought as a young man coming up. So, that has been, I would say, in my adult life, when I put aside all the success, all of the great things and blessings that have been a part of my sort of story.
Right.
When I put all that aside, I think the biggest challenge has been just that, kind of making sure that I maintain that connection with my kids, and so in terms of recovery and just making sure that I stay on purpose and on track, it has really been about them.
So, and we hear that a lot, right? And so we hear a lot of those conversations where I hear a lot of men in the discussions I have with them talk greatly about the fact that some of it was not necessarily just them not wanting to be around. A lot of it had to do with just the relationship, and the relationship was so tarnished, couldn't get back to it, or whatever the case may be. We all grew up middle-aged people, I would say 37 and up, during a time where, grown folks' business was grown folks' business. You didn't question it. You didn't have a lot of conversation around it. It was basically what they said went, and to a certain degree, I think a lot of that can be said to be true, and there's a lot of good out of that. But I think our generation, we do a lot of talking with them. We allow them express themselves, and I can't say either or is much better or worse. But I will say we didn't know a lot of stuff about what our parents did. We didn't understand it as we got to be older. If they, for one, didn't want to admit to it. For two, you had people who, adults who just don't have to want to rehash that type of stuff. We see it on talk shows. We see it on Instagram. I see it on social media all the time where the woman or the father, but I would say primarily the woman in this situation, it's tough for her to kind of relive that part of their lives. And so this is not me bashing that situation, but it's just like, we've heard so much about the fathers. Always for guys just to hear the fathers, but we never hear the other side of it. You never really hear your father's side of it. It's what you've been told that this situation is. And so I even heard men who will say, just capture that and don't worry about it. And maybe they might give it to you and they might not. And a lot of it is because they're trying to protect the innocence that you may have or what you believed it was. And a lot of men will just take it. And I think what's happening now for a lot of guys who are middle age, they're like, I'm not doing it. And some of the young guys like, I'm not doing it at all. I don't think we both can't keep doing that if we want to have a certain level of community. If we're making a better community, even for the young people and the teenagers and things of that nature. Shout out to my young guys who are showing up for my Iron Circle, who may not say too much, but just on the call listening to guys who are healthy, guys who have recovered, guys who may have been depressed at the time, but they see the other side of it. So kudos to you. And if you're trying to like just push through, But I just really wanted to focus on this particular call, really just diving into facing what that is. Because when you face what it is, you know how to handle it. It's just like you go to a mechanic and you are at the mechanic and you're, trying to figure out all these things until they do a diagnosis with your car and they tell you what it is, then you can fix that problem. And so I think for men, I'm speaking to the guys out there, when you dive in and figure out what that is, when you're going through a depression or a time, talking to a guy who is not going to belittle other people, but is also going to try to help you and push you through certain situations, to identify what that is. And once you identify what that is, then working on it and trying to provide ways to handle that situation is huge. So I'm gonna let him talk a little bit more.
Well, at what point, were you feeling that there was a recovery? Was it, because I'm gonna speak. Mine is not. Again, I wasn't married, but I was in a relationship that I felt like again took me years to get over. At what point was that did you feel like there was need for recovery, or did you feel that way, or maybe subconsciously you didn't think that it was actually being recovery, but you actually had to go through something, to get you through this time? Because there's a change that happens, right?
Yeah. No, I would say it was immediate. That I knew almost right away that I was, even before the marriage ended, I knew that I wasn't quite myself.
Right.
And the fear, the fear that I had that things were changing and that I would have little to no control. I mean, for those of you who are listening who had to navigate through the family court system and deal with that, you almost know right away that, man, this is not set up for me. For me, it was almost an immediate, wait, I'm going to need some help through this. I'm going to need some help in terms of making sure that I don't allow depression or fear of loss or anger or bitterness sort of take over me. Because if it does, then I won't be able to live the purpose that I sort of set out to, and I certainly won't be able to be a good dad or even a good dude for another, a woman that I might, be meant to share my life with.
Can you talk about your feeling that you had? Let's think about that feeling. I'm gonna talk about my feeling at first, and then you can tell me. Just be thinking about like that feeling that you had. What was that feeling that you had?
So before we get into that feeling, I know that you want to hear the rest of it. I know you do, but I want to do a recap and just talk a little bit about again. So like as from talking to my guys, and so again, 1 in 4 children grow up with their father or an adopted person or a father figure. Over 6 million men in the U.S. experience depression each year. 3 and 4 times more than likely, men commit suicide. I just want to stop right there and talk a little bit about that. Doing Mental Health Awareness Month and really just understand the first thing is breaking the silence, understanding that it's okay to talk about it with somebody, a trusted friend, or if you got to spend the money, spend the money. Talk to somebody. Talk to a therapist. Talk to someone that's close to you. Hopefully they will direct you into that direction because you have to take care of your mental. We'll talk about the rest later, and we will have a really good conversation and dive into how you identify it immediately instead of pushing that over into another relationship, pushing that over to even the kids, because I've even seen it even in myself. I think that our parents had a lot on them and they may have pushed it on us, not being intentional about it, but when you're aware and you understand what's going on and you see this thing called life, it definitely brings things to a light. So thanks again for the Brother to Brother show. I'm your host, K Mo. Peace.